Welcome to episode 12 of the Two and Tie podcast. What is going on, everybody? Today we're going to talk about some really cool stuff. And I know, like I said, I say this every week, but it sounds to me like the content gets just cooler and cooler every single week. And today again, I am joined by my co-host, Poonam.
Hi, everybody.
So last week, when we left off the podcast, we actually talked about home renovations and we talked about investments and investors as your main audience. And one of the things I said last week is we are going to refocus our attention at some point on a future podcast on flipping properties for families and not for investors. And guess what? We're going to talk about that today. So today's podcast, like I said, is really focused around investing for families. And when we're and you know, a lot of people like flipping properties, and my biggest concern with people flipping properties is sometimes they don't understand their audience very well. So in last week's podcast, I talked about separating your audiences. In one instance, you may have investors that are your audience, and in another instance, you may have families that are your audience. And depending on who you're targeting is really going to determine your renovation. So if you're interested on investing for investors, I highly recommend you go to twoandtie.com/episode 11 and listen to that podcast. This week on episode 12, we're going to talk about flipping properties for families and some of the things families look for. Now, we've done both. We've actually flipped properties for investors and we flip properties for families. And one of the properties we purchased last year was specifically for investors and building income suites. And we actually purchased another property about 3 months right after that, so about 9 months ago or so. And essentially the project was to purchase the property, flip it so that we can resell it back to a family. And the strategy for both is fairly different. So today's episode is going to be strictly focused on families. Okay, so let's get right into it. So I've got Poonam with me today, and we're going to talk to you about certain things when it comes to renovating your property, certain things that are very, very important to a family. So when you actually think about it, about purchasing a property for yourself, you walk into properties and you look at certain things that you want to do that are important to you. You look at things like kitchens, you look at things like bathrooms, and a whole bunch of other stuff. And that's going to be the crux of today's podcast. So Poonam, tell us, when we actually flipped the property about 9 months ago, we purchased a property. It was a 3-bedroom property as well, and 3-bedroom properties do fairly well in terms of flipping properties. So Poonam, like I said, we flipped this property about 9 months ago. There's a fairly good return on it. We'll get into the numbers in a second, but why don't you sort of talk to the audience about certain work that we did in the house that really helped add value to the property?
So I think to start off, the one place that you really want to focus a lot of your time and energy in is the heart of the home, which is known as the kitchen. So that was definitely where a lot of our focus was. The biggest renovation actually happened there. The other renovation that we did in our home was the powder room downstairs, because of course that's where a lot of the traffic is generated. And so we wanted that place to look nice. And the last place was the outside of the home, which was the landscaping. And that included not only the grass, because we needed to resod and start from scratch, but it was also the plants and sort of changing the whole theme of what we wanted it to look like outside.
Yeah, and in terms of landscaping, a lot of people sometimes underestimate the value of landscaping. And that is a colossal mistake in my opinion, because when you look at a property, when a potential home purchaser is actually driving by it, the outside is kind of like your first impression of the home. And it's also sometimes indicative to say if a homeowner is taking care of the outside, there's a good chance they've taken care of the inside as well. So landscaping is definitely something that you want to focus on. And when Boonam was talking about us going back and resodding the property was really when you look at the lawn on the front, it was very much damaged. There was a lot of bald spots in there, and
A lot of weeds.
A lot of weeds, yeah. And it was at the point where there were so many weeds that we just said, it's not even worth for us to just sort of put in like a weed killer and stuff. We actually had the whole property re-landscaped. We had all the weeds dug out. We dug out the entire front and then resodded it. And the end result was amazing when you sort of look at the transformation before and after. We also added some shrubs as well, so that sort of gave a little bit of a curve appeal and a little bit more color to the property as well. So all in all, that sort of helped quite a bit. Now, when we talk about the kitchen, which Boonam touched upon, one of the things that's different between when you're going to redo your kitchen for an investor versus somebody who's going to move into the home is the emotional attachment piece to it. With an investor, like I said in last week's podcast, there's really no emotional attachment. It's all about how do you maximize the revenue. And when I say revenue, I mean rent out of every square foot. When you're looking at selling to a property, it's very much an emotional investment. So you really want to be able to connect with your audience and really stay on trend with what's new out there and make sure that you're on, like I said, on trend. So, white cabinets, if you're going to go with that, or if you're going to go with the dark maple, or if you're going to go with, there's a whole bunch of different things that are trending out there, and you want to stay on trend in terms of material and in terms of design as well. And then the last piece is the powder room. And not only just the powder room, there's also washrooms upstairs as well. Sometimes that count. You want to make sure that it looks modern and elegant, and most of all, it's functional. I've seen so many washrooms where the washroom is extremely large and you have one sink that's shared across two people. And it just doesn't make a whole lot of sense. You really want to make it more functional to say so that if you have a master ensuite, you want to make sure that it's a double sink so that the male and the female both kind of have their own space, especially if the space is there and you don't want to confine yourself with one sink. So there's a lot of things you can do to sort of add value to a property as well. And we did that. Fortunately, our master ensuite actually was equipped with 2 seats, so there's very little work we needed to do. It was just more design and decor. But the powder room downstairs really needed an overhaul, and we basically gutted the entire washroom and redid it from scratch. We added some brand new tiles, we added some backsplashes, a really nice modern sink, some modern fixtures, and obviously a high efficiency toilet. And when you add all that kind of stuff in, it actually adds value to the property. The last thing that we did, and I would highly emphasize for anybody who's looking to flip a property, is to stage your home. There are a lot of times where homeowners think that they know how to stage their property, and sometimes they date their property by staging it based on what they put in there, or sometimes they're just not able to connect with the audience. If you hire a professional staging company, it costs anywhere between a couple of $100 to a couple of $1,000. It is absolutely worth it because they stage it in a way that is dated to current trends, but at the same time dated to the current audience based on what area you're in. So they know that certain homes have sold in the past or that are around the area, and these are some of the key features that homeowners are looking for. And you really want to sort of hire their expertise. From the work that we've done with staging companies, it has absolutely paid off. And what it does is it adds an element of elegance and an upgraded sort of aesthetic appeal when homeowners actually walk through it and look at the property. So you really want to focus on that as well. Now, when it comes to determining some of the materials that you're going to use to upgrade your property, in last week's episode, we talked about using you don't want to go too high when it comes to materials. You want to get emotionally attached to the materials and gravitate to the high-end stuff. I would say that's probably similar in this case. You don't want to gravitate to the high-end stuff, but maybe you may want to, invest a little bit more because you know that the homeowners, like I said, have an emotional attachment to properties. And one of the things you definitely want to do is survey the properties around your area to see what kind of fixtures and materials they're using, because what you don't want to do is look inferior to some of your competitors that are around the area. So I would say one of the things you definitely want to do is grab a real estate agent and survey the properties around your area to see what people are putting in, and also look at some recently sold homes to see if to sort of determine what they've put in. You can typically get that from a real estate agent because they've got pictures that they've put up when they were looking to sell the home at the time, and that can really inform your decision on certain things that you want to upgrade to your property?
Just as an FYI, I also often sometimes go and look at open houses as well that are in the area, just to give myself a little bit of an idea of what is the new trend out there, because the trends are like computers, they're outdated so quickly, and before you know it, you're thinking your house is all modernized, and it may not be. So oftentimes, just to kind of get a theme of certain areas and what some rooms look like, what their color scheme is, things like that, you can translate some of that information into your own home and maybe even modify it to make it so that it, really speaks to your personality and what you want that your home to look like.
Yeah, no, that's definitely a great point. So I think we've done a good job, in my opinion, or our opinion, of covering some of the design elements. Now, what I want to do is just get into some quick numbers. What I can tell you is, after we actually did some of the renovations in our home, factoring out the cost of staging, factoring out the cost of our real estate agent coming in and doing some appraisals for us, and factoring also outside of the cost of some of the real estate transactional costs, we actually netted about $45,000 on one of our properties, which is, in my opinion, a fairly sizable investment. Now, because we did some of the work on our own, because we are DIYers at the end of the day, it took us about 4.5 months to do some of the work, but $45,000 on 4.5 months of work on a part-time basis, in my opinion, is not a bad return on investment. So you can definitely make money in terms of flipping properties. You just need to make sure that you know what you're doing. And like I said, I mentioned in the last podcast, I'll say it again, some of the best people you can partner with is a real estate agent and a lawyer, because they will have all the I's dotted and the T's crossed to make sure that whatever you're putting in is on trend, but at the same time, you're not over investing in certain areas where the payback is just not going to be there. So that's kind of our story. Again, we made some good money off of it. We're going to look to do another flip very, very soon, and we'll maybe do another podcast on that. But hopefully that gives you a little bit of more information. And again, one of the key differences that I'm going to emphasize again between investing for an investor versus a family is the emotional attachment. It is really strongly about that. Homeowners or people that are looking for homes tend to become very, very attached to certain things and that are on trend. And you want to make sure that you're on trend so that you can attract them, you can get that emotional attachment, and at the end of the day, sell that property to them. Okay? So I hope you enjoyed today's podcast. Again, Poonam, thank you very much for being on the podcast.
No problem. Thank you for having me on.
And we will pick up next week on another brand new and exciting topic. Until then, guys, stay happy and stay productive.